Hello, hey there, welcome in. It's me, Joshua M. Stevens. Whether you're a chatter or looker, just typing, I'm glad to have you here. We're going to be going through my mind slop editing, AFK and RuneScape. So yeah, let's get started and turn the music down. This is a good level. Maybe that.
Theo asked genuinely, do you think he was in love with her? Riley couldn't help but burst out in laughter as she said, please, Vlad is in love with every female he encounters. Doesn't matter if it's a hume, demi-hume, beastman, or a straight-up monster. Cutting in, Isaac said, I think it's more to do with how close they are in personalities. Avery was just on the prowl for romance and perverted as much as Vlad, their love for the art of combat, and most of all, their passion for instigating bullshit. While packing another bowl with herbs from his smoking pouch, Theo said, honestly, I think Vlad will be fine. We have a whole week before we head out. He just needs to spend time with people. It's Lizyra I'm concerned about. She's been acting strange ever since she woke up from that dream she's been talking about. Isaac said assumingly, well, she did drink whatever poisonous and nullifying potion those thieves forced her to drink, so most of what she's going through probably has something to do with that. On top of getting shot in the back and almost dying. I'd say she's doing pretty well for what's happened. After lighting and taking a hit from his pipe, Theo handed it to Vincent, who immediately passed it to Isaac and said, sorry Theo, but no thanks, I might have actually drank a little too much too fast and I'm starting to feel it all at once. Riley perked up and said, maybe you should take it easy, Vincent. I mean, we haven't even been home a full day and you haven't really drank since before the last expedition. Vincent laughed and said, I thought I was taking it easy. This ale just feels stronger than before. Exhaling a monstrous plume of smoke, Theo said, even though Lizyra's behavior has been questionable lately, that's not what concerns me. It's what and where she dreamt about. And the fact she woke up holding something she didn't have before she slept. And how she woke up covered in wounds. Isaac said, yeah, it is all strange, but the rock is probably something she already had in her possession and forgot. And about the wounds, out of everyone here, Lizyra is the most prone to accidents and injury for some reason, and she's slept-walked before, so I don't know. Glancing curiously, Theo asked, for someone you have raised as your own for about 10 years now, you don't feel the least bit concerned? Taking a rip from the cob pipe that would even rival Theo's, Isaac said while holding the smoke in his lungs, yes, I am, but... He exhaled a plume of smoke still inferior to Theo's and continued, like everyone has been saying, she's not a little girl anymore. She's been 18 for months now, working in the field since she was 15-16-ish, and her magic is on course to rival yours someday. Isaac passed the pipe to Riley and continued, we looked for horcruxes in her room. There was no signs of any succubus, incubus, or any other night terror-driven monsters, so unless she directly comes to me about something in particular, I think it's best to let her find her own way. Riley cut in sarcastically and said, ah, look at you. Daddy finally is all grown up. It only took about 30 years. Years. What's changed all of a sudden? Isaac sat for a moment before saying, I don't know, it's just if I spend every minute worrying and making sure everyone is okay, I won't actually have time to meaningfully spend with everyone. After losing Avery and not being there to be able to do anything that could have helped, has me realizing that even with healing spells, revival relics, and even resurrection spells, everyone can still die for good, and that's the end. Riley slammed down her empty mug down on the table that Isaac had drank and exclaimed, all right, Mr. Everyone can still die for good, and that's the end. Riley slammed down her empty mug down on the table that Isaac had drank and exclaimed, all right, mister. Who the fuck are ya? Riley slammed down her empty mug on the table that Isaac had drank and exclaimed, all right, mister. Who the fuck are ya? That ain't Isaac. From and exclaimed, all right, mister. Who the fuck are ya? That ain't Isaac in there. She roughly leaned over onto him and pulled up the sleeve to his tunic, revealing a thin and slightly faded barbed wire, tribal-like tattoo that wrapped around his upper arm near his shoulder. After moving Isaac's arm around to get a better look at it, she said, still looks good, but we should all probably get our tattoos touched up. Slamming Isaac's arm down onto the table, she said, the real Isaac would say something like, Riley stood from her seat with both hands firmly planted on the table and said in her best impression as Isaac, I'm gonna find who she stole that jewel from and make her return it and apologize before some Imperial scum shows up looking for it and I have to cut his head off and feed the body to Nox. Laughing, Isaac said, that was one time. And Lizyra wouldn't let me feed the body to Nox. She said, and I quote, Isaac did his best to mimic Lizyra's voice and demeanor as he said, if Nox starts eating people, he's going to become a bad dragon and start only wanting to eat people. And the first person I'd let him eat would be you. Everyone abruptly erupted into laughter at Isaac's impression of Lizyra as Vincent said between laughs, if anyone is acting strangely around here is you, Isaac. Not to bring up bad memories, but even when Theo telecommanded you that we would teleport us all out of the caravan on your command, we all thought you were ready to strike. Remorsefully, Isaac said, that was my fault. I let something Lizyra said get to me days before about how even if someone does something that the law now permits you can kill them, you still shouldn't. So I was trying not to do anything unnecessary. Riley looked under the table and then back at Isaac and said, seriously, What the fuck is going on with you? A bit surprised, Isaac asked, what? You guys are supposed to be my closest friends, can I not confide in you all of a sudden? Riley sat back down in her chair with a suspicious look on her face and responded, usually you don't, that's what's concerning. Taking a wild rip from Theo's pipe, Riley shoved it into Theo's chest instead of handing it to him and continued saying while holding the smoke in her lungs, you haven't had any weird dreams about any mirrors lately, have you? If I didn't know better, I'd say you're now acting as weird as Lizyra. A hiccup from Vincent interrupted the conversation as he said, I think you've all had too much to drink and are overthinking things. Just then the barmaiden appeared behind Theo and said, Mai is ready to see you now. I'll watch over your belongings and have your next round of drinks sent upstairs to her office. Theo said, that's alright, I think we've all had enough to drink, lady. He handed her a handful of gold coins that would have seemed more to the amount of a bribe than a tip and asked, what do you mean by upstairs though? Isn't Mai's office on the ground floor? Lighting up as if she got to be part of the conversation, the barmaiden said, oh that's right. You guys were gone so long you must not have known. Mai moved her office up into the central spire. Said she was tired of her old office and needed a better view. A bit dumbfounded, Theo repeated, the central spire, huh? Before he knew it, he was no longer in the tavern part of the establishment but had already walked down a few hallways and was standing in a dark corridor staring up at a grand staircase spiraling upwards as far as the darkness allowed him to. Half leaning on Isaac for support, Vincent said while looking up the staircase, I think I'm going to be sick. Isaac asked, exactly how many stories up is that? With a growl, Riley responded, by the gods you men are such fucking infants. She knelt down on her hands and took off up the steps on all fours like a wild animal, causing the skirt of her tunic to flip upward, revealing her panties tucked neatly between her buttocks while her tail swung wildly behind her. As Riley vanished around the spiral of the steps, Vincent drunkenly called out, damn. Did you all see that? Tilting the brim of his wizard's hat over his face, Theo responded, I wish I hadn't. Sourly, Isaac said, I get no pleasure at gawking at your girlfriend's ass. You know better than anyone she's the closet thing I have to a sister, and if she were to walk in front Sourly, Isaac said, I get no pleasure at gawking at your girlfriend's ass. You know better than anyone she's the closest thing I have to a sister, and if she were to walk in front of me completely naked, I would be unfazed. As everyone began traversing the steps, Vincent said defeatedly, "Aw come on. You guys are acting like she's some kind of troll or hobgoblin foaming at the maw." "No," Isaac responded, "we don't see her the way you do. I still see the same little brat from when we were runts who would lie and say I was pulling on her tail when she couldn't get her way. Or how she would bring me dead birds and rats and get offended when I wouldn't accept them as gifts." Interruptingly, Theo said, "Yeah, well, when I see an ass like that it only reminds me of how much time I lost serving the Empire and how now I'm just some washed up mage." Slapping Theo said, "Yeah, well, when I see an ass like that it only reminds me of how much time I lost serving the Empire and how now I'm just some old washed up mage." Slapping Theo on the shoulder, Vincent said, "Oh, come on now. You're not some washed up old mage, you're a washed up old Grand Master mage." Instead of laughing, Isaac asked, "Can't you just teleport us to the top?" As if he had suddenly aged to 100, Theo said while tripping up the steps, "I've never been to the top, so I don't know what or where I'd be teleporting us to. And becoming half-phased through stone walls or steps doesn't pleasant, especially if Riley's underside were to come flying past." A bit annoyed, Isaac replied, "All right, the next uniform I make everyone I'll..." Pleasant, especially if Riley's... As if he had suddenly aged to 100, Theo said while tripping up the steps, "I've never been to the top, so I don't know what or where I'd be teleporting us to. And becoming half-phased through stone walls or steps doesn't sound pleasant, especially if Riley's underside were to come flying past. A bit annoyed, Isaac replied, "Alright, the next uniform I make everyone I'll make sure to be more conservative and make leggings part of the main attire so both your cocks don't get hard the next time a little bit of skin is showing." As they traversed the staircase, Isaac began thinking out loud, actually that's not a bad idea. Leggings would mean more chance for enchanted clothing. And they hug the skin directly, giving a better contact ratio of skin to fabric, giving higher efficiency of effects from enchantments. With a hiccup, Vincent added, "And they're sexy." Slapping his palm to his forehead, Isaac rebutted, "The whole point of adding leggings to the uniform was so you stop sexualizing it." "What do you mean they're sexy? They're fucking pieces of fabric. I don't know if you've spent too much time around Vlad or if Esmeralda has cast some kind of spell or enchantment on everyone, but I don't know what's gotten into you." Laughing loudly until it almost became vomit, Vincent asked, "What's gotten into me? You're the one who's suddenly become all sentimental and squishy when I've watched you stab a man through the heart for saying Lizyra and Kitsune looked sickly and that you should feed them more. If it wasn't for Kitsune bringing him back and me bribing him, you'd be in prison." Isaac said with a frown, "I don't know what that has to do with anything, but okay." Vincent replied, "Just the other day you had threatened an Imperial priest over Onyx saying you'd send him back to his maker, but now if Lizyra were to be in peril you'd do nothing unless she asked for help." Stopping briefly to scratch his nose, Vincent asked, "And what the fuck is that smell?" Curiously, Theo said, "I don't know, but I've smelt it for a while now." As they reached the top of the staircase, a voice called out, "That smell is the enchanted incense we've been burning due to the high influx of patrons fleeing from Karthsworth and Darkwell." Imperial priest over Onyx saying you'd send him back to his maker, but now if Lizyra were to be in peril you'd do nothing unless she asked for help. Stopping briefly to scratch his nose, Vincent asked, "And what the fuck is that smell?" Curiously, Theo said, "I don't know, but I've smelt it for a while now." As they reached the top of the staircase, a voice called out, "That smell is the enchanted incense we've been burning due to the high influx of patrons fleeing from Karthsworth and Darkwell." Standing at the top of the staircase was a tall and slender elf with long white and gray hair. She wore a dark green and black tunic and cloak similar to Isaac, Theo, and Vincent's as she pushed the glasses from the tip of her nose back onto its bridge. Quite amused, she said, "That incense is supposed to have a calming, relaxing, Quite amused, she said, "That incense is supposed to have a calming, yes, if not nostalgic effect on those who inhale it, but nevertheless it has you three bickering up a storm, unsurprisingly enough." She turned around and began walking back into her office as she continued, "We thought with all the necromantic uprising recently and the tragedies they've caused it would be best to have it burning throughout the college." Tilting his head to greet her even though she wasn't looking, Theo said, "Lovely to see you too, my." Throughout the college. Tilting his head to greet her even though she wasn't looking, Theo said, "Lovely to see you too, my." Throughout the college. Tilting his head to greet her even though she wasn't looking, Theo said, "Lovely to see you too, my." Walking past her desk littered with artifacts and open grimoires, Mai sat in a large revolving desk chair and said, "It's good to see you too, Master Theodore. Rare of you to step foot from behind the safety of your armored moving war fortress." Already standing in the corner of the office fidgeting with a model of the planet and its 3 moons, Riley said provokingly, "He still shits in the broken stall of car 4 barking orders with the door open." Somewhere between a smug smirk and a frown, Mai said, "Why does that not surprise me?" Theo said quickly, avoiding their remarks, "So what made you move your office up here? Surely can't be the hike up the steps." "Actually," Mai stated, "ever since I left the caravan to administrate here, I don't get out in the field much, so I put on a few pounds. So, I've been using the steps as a form of exercise. With a bit of concern, Isaac asked, you put on a few pounds? To me it looks like you've lost at least 10. Are you even eating? Isaac glanced around at her messy office that was cluttered with open books and documents laying around freely and said, by the looks of it, I'd say at this rate you probably haven't eaten in days. Vincent chuckled and said, look, he's already worrying again about people. Shut up, Isaac teased. Of course I'm worried. I never wanted Mai to leave in the first place. Really? Mai questioned, because if I don't recall, you were the one who suggested I come back here to take a mastery class on summoning at the time. With a frown, Isaac replied, I never said to take over and run the fucking place. Mai matched Isaac's frown and said, well, there was an opening. And the pay was better. Still spinning the moons around the planet insanely fast, Riley asked, so what's so important that you called us all the way up to your mighty tower, O headmaster Mai? Removing a small red and green jewel from a pocket on her tunic, she placed it on her desk and said, this. Everyone looked at the stone briefly before Theo asked, did you mysteriously wake up with that in your hand this morning or something?
Did you Hakusho?
You mysteriously wake up with that in your hand this morning or something? Looking confused, Mai looked over at Theo. Her desk around, she pushed in front of. Everyone looked at the stone briefly before Theo asked, did you mysteriously wake up with that in your hand this morning or something? Looking confused, Mai looked over at Theo and said, what? No. During the delivery this morning, Gabi gave it to me since a good portion of what we had ordered was missing due to thievery. He gave it to me as a token of his apology. Said one of the thieves he managed to kill had it on him. Shuffling some of the books and documents on her desk around, she pushed in front of Theo and continued, whether he knew it or not, this is the key to unlock the sanctimonious altar inside Gloomshade Temple. This has been missing since like forever. Isaac looked at the informative page in her book, then back at her and said, okay, so what are we supposed to do with it? Almost in shock, Mai protested, don't you want to see what's inside? The last person to set foot inside there was over 1,000 years ago, and we don't even know if that's true or a myth. There could be all sorts of relics and treasure in there. That's almost in shock, Mai protested, don't you want? That's true or a myth. There could be all sorts of relics and treasure in there. And with the lunar eclipse of Alberta at the end of the month, we'll be able to go inside since we have the key now. While quite drunk, Vincent asked, so by we you mean us and not you? Now smiling, Mai said, exactly. Isaac chimed in, so you want us to go plunder Gloomshade Temple for you? Almost slamming her head on her desk, Mai asked, wasn't one of our whole things going and collecting potential artifacts that could cause cataclysm if fallen into the wrong hands? Respectfully, Theo said, yeah, but if no one has been able to get in for thousands of years and now you are the only one with the key, doesn't that mean if anything dangerous is inside, it's locked up nice and tight? Safe and sound. Locked up nice and tight. Safe and sound. Mai slumped back in her seat and said, after all the adventures we've gone on, the monsters we've eliminated, and the artifacts we've seized, aren't you the least bit curious as to what's in there? Informatively, Isaac said, I don't know if I'd call those adventures, we were just doing our jobs. And frankly, no, I don't wonder what's in there. That place's history is cursed, and it really just sounds like you regret leaving the caravan and want to go on an adventure since you now have the key to get inside. With a resentful glare, Mai said, well, asshole. She opened one of her drawers of her desk and pulled a large sack of gold coins out from within it and threw at Isaac's face and continued, the Archaeological Guild is offering you a large sum of money to go and investigate what's inside and bring back something possibly known as an Ember Shard. Leaning forward and asking sarcastically, Isaac quipped, aren't you literally the guild itself? Leaning in toward Isaac, Mai responded, "No, I'm 1/5 of the guild's committee and I thought it would have been exciting and curious to offer this once-in-a-lifetime offer to my friends and former colleagues before it gets passed down to second-rate floozies who would rather..." Leaning in toward Isaac, Mai responded, "No, I'm 1/5 of the guild's committee and I thought it would have been exciting and curious to offer this once-in-a-lifetime offer to my friends and former colleges before it gets passed down to second..."
Fucking autocorrect. How the fuck do you spell this word? How the fuck do you spell this word? I thought auto spell check would have been smart enough to figure it out. Oh, it's an A. Go back to school, you dumb fuck. It was an A and not a U the whole time. A-E-I-O-U. Sometimes fuck you. Alright, now we can try it again.
Leaning forward and asking sarcastically, Isaac quipped, "Aren't you literally the guild itself?" Leaning in toward Isaac, Mai responded, "No, I'm 1/5 of the guild's committee and I thought it would have been exciting and curious to offer this once-in-a-lifetime offer to my friends and former colleagues before it gets passed down to second-rate floozies who would rather pawn anything they find for a gold coin than honor the contract they signed, which could lead to another cataclysm event like the one that happened to Enos." With a devious grin, Isaac said, "So what you're really saying is that if we don't accept the job, the possibility that some crooked contractor could get his hands on something, not realizing what it is, selling it, letting it fall into the wrong hands, and the disaster that could ensue afterwards would be all our faults just because..." With a devious grin, Isaac said, "So what you're really saying is that if we don't accept the job, the possibility that some crooked contractor could get his hands on something, not realizing what it is, selling it, letting it fall into the wrong hands, and the disaster that could ensue afterwards would be all our faults just because you wanted to see what's inside." Raising to her feet and point toward the door, Mai said angrily, "All right." Raising to her feet and pointing toward the door, Mai said angrily, Rising to her feet and pointing toward the door, Mai said angrily, "All right, get the fuck out." She picked up the gold bag once again and threw it as hard as she could at Isaac and said, "Take that with you and don't come back unless you have something proving you went inside, you fucking prick." As everyone turned to walk out of Mai's office, she said while she turned her back to everyone, Next month Master Zane will be offering a master summoning course like the one I attended and will be handing off some of his mythic summoning contracts at the end, so if you wanted to send Lizyra, Kitsune, and Adele I can waive the tuition fees. The class is only offered to former alumni and it's probably going to be his last one given he's retiring at the end of the year, so I thought I'd let you guys know. Theo said while he bowed in Mai's direction. I'll definitely run that past the girls when I see them. And thank you. It's actually about time for me to catch the last teleport of the day out to the capital. I have my own investigating to do before we head out on our next expedition. Theo tilted his hat and finished his bow and then began trotting down the stairs with a quickness. Not far behind him, Riley, Isaac, and Vincent came walking out from Mai's office, all three trying their best to keep Vincent from stumbling over from how randomly drunk he had become. Stuffing the gold satchel and the green and red jewel into a pocket underneath his cloak, Isaac said, I wonder if the Archaeology Guild really are the ones asking us to go or if it's really just her. Not disagreeing, Riley said, it did seem to be all that was on her mind. She didn't even ask how Sakura or the rest of the flock was doing. So my bet is it's a personal request. With both arms over Isaac and Riley's shoulders and letting them burden all his weight, Vincent said, well, I guess we're putting Gloomshade Temple at the top of the priority list when we leave. Chapter 30, Sleeping in Stone. Lizyra/Rosai 3/Y420, Dusk Tide. Fumbling her hands around an indentation of stone, Lizyra tried placing an expensive-looking jewel embedded in gold into as she said, I promise you it goes something like this. Removing her hand. Fumbling her hands around an indentation of stone, Lizyra tried placing the expensive red and green jewel stone Mai had given Isaac into as she said, I promise you it goes something like this. Removing her hand, the jewel fell from the indent and tumbled on. Fumbling her hands around an indentation of stone, Lizyra tried placing the expensive red and green jewel stone Mai had given Isaac into as she said, I promise you it goes something like this. Removing her hand, the jewel fell from the indent and tumbled onto the stone steps of the temple entrance. Adele laughed while floating next to her and said, I'm telling you we have to wait until the eclipse tonight before the doors will even be able to open. Picking up the jewel while he walked up the steps, Osiris said, and what I'm saying is you two imbeciles are going to break the damn thing before we can even get the door open. Aggressively snatching the jewel from him, Lizyra said, I appreciate the input, but I think we can handle it. Laying nearby on a large stone with her hands kicked by behind her head, Kitsune said as she casually Laying nearby on a large stone with her hands kicked behind her head, Kitsune said as she casually kicked small nearby rock off the ledge and said as it fell 10 or so meters down below, you guys have been at it for hours, could you just give it a rest? The sun's already coming out. She leaned over on her side and looked up one of the long pillars that bordered the entranceway. At the top of it, Nox lay curled in a ball sleeping, his tail draping over the side of its ledge. The temple was large. Just the staircase leading up to its entrance could easily fit 10 men side by side. The front door was a large slab of stone covered in chiseled magic symbols and unreadable text, accompanied by 2 stone statue fountains of Farron, the god of the hunt and feral beasts. In his hands of both statues, he held a large bowl that funneled down to a drain covered by leaves and pine needles. Looking the door over himself, Osiris suggested, "Have you tried using that spell you almost killed me with to try and malfunction any of the mechanisms hidden within the walls that control the door? Or perhaps using it to hold the stone in place while you search for a level or mechanism?" Lizyra said while fumbling. Looking the door over himself, Osiris suggested, "Have you tried using that spell you almost killed me with to try and malfunction any of the mechanisms hidden within the walls that control the door? Or perhaps using it to hold the stone in place while you search for a lever or mechanism?" Lizyra said while fumbling around again with the door shamefully, "I already said I was sorry." Snarkily, Osiris said, "If you think I was being malicious with what I said, you are mistaken. I was genuinely suggesting it." "If it was that easy," Lizyra said, "someone would have gotten in long ago." Walking up the steps behind them, a voice called out, "I think it needs some silver nitrate or mercury to fill the fountains." Everyone turned to see Isaac reading from a tome that Theo had lent him about the temple while he said, "Says right here something about silver tears of nitrate will reveal the lock you seek." Sarcastically Osiris said, "That's quite poetic." Closing the book, Isaac said, "Theo's handwriting is so shitty, I can barely read what he translated." He reached into a satchel on his belt and pulled a small vial of silver nitrate out and said, "Because of how much we used to coat our weapons with last expedition, this is all we have left. Definitely won't be enough for both fountains." With the snap of her fingers, a temporal rift tore open next to her as Adele floated inside between the crackling bits of black and green lighting. Moments later a keg came crashing out of it. With the snap of her fingers, a temporal rift tore open next to her as Adele floated inside between the crackling bits of black and green lightning. Moments later a keg came crashing out of it, almost rolling over the edge of the steps if it weren't for Osiris stopping it with the hell of his boot. Adele floated out of the rift while it slammed shut and vanished behind her while she said, "I have an ex—"
God, fucking so many mistakes.
Heel of his boot. Adele floated out of the rift while it slammed shut and vanished behind her while she said, "I have an extra keg right here at your thinking we need to fill the fountains." With a puzzled look, Lizyra said, "Even if we fill them, how do we turn them on? We'd just be wasting silver nitrate if we just poured it in there and couldn't get it back out." From over upon her stone, Kitsune chimed in and said, "I agree with Adele, and nothing we do will even matter until tonight, until the lunar eclipse starts." Flipping the tome back open and reading from Theo's poorly translations written directly on the pages of the book, technically the eclipse started this morning at Ascentide, so theoretically it's already started, we just won't be able to witness it until dusktide. Even so, Kitsune said, "I think we should all cuddle up and take a nap and worry about it later tonight." She curled up in a ball on the ledge and covered herself with her large fluffy foxtail, shielding her from the bitter morning chill. Kicking back like she was laying in a hammock, Adele floated over toward Kitsune and said, "I agree with the ball of fuss. We've only wasted about 3 of 4 hours fucking around with the door. We still have plenty of time. Osiris could maybe even put some tea on the stove down in the caravan for us." Annoyed, Osiris moaned, "Why am I fetching the tea and not included in it in the orgy?" Kitsune barked from under her fluff. "The fact you called it an orgy is why you weren't invited." Adele smirked and said, "I'd much rather have Nox knocking at the back door than have your needle dick poking at my backside." Isaac cut in and said, "Enough. You can fantasize about your lustful interactial monster smut after we're back in blue." Interracial monster smut after we're back in Blue Wyvern sleeping in real beds. After clearing away the pine needles and leaves from one of the fountain bowls, Isaac picked up the barrel and set it horizontally on one of the fountains as he opened its tap. Silver nitrate flowed in metallic sheets as it spiraled into the bowl and down the drain, disappearing as Isaac shut of the tap and carried the barrel over to the other fountain. Off the tap and carried the barrel over to the other fountain. While he opened the tap again, Lizyra said with a pout, "Nox isn't a monster." With a heavy sigh, Isaac said, "I didn't mean it like that." Turning around and looking at him, Lizyra protested, "Yes you did. Adele said she rather fuck Nox than Osiris and you said she can fantasize about her interracial monster smut later. Implying he's a monster." Regretfully, Isaac responded, "It was a poor choice of words on my part and I'm sorry." Turning back towards the door, Lizyra said, "It isn't me you should be apologizing to." With a quick blushing laugh, Adele said, "Sounds like a good choice of words to me." Again from underneath her tuft of fluff, Kitsune said in a groan, "You guys are so crass and disgusting I forget why I ever left the capital to travel with you lot." Without missing a beat, Osiris said, "You're probably a spy sent by the Emperor to keep tabs on Theodore. I don't see any other reason they'd let a Kitsune willingly leave the safety of the capital's fortified walls." Still lazily floating about, Adele said, "I don't know why we don't call her by her first name instead of Kitsune. Isn't that your last name?" With a deep guttural moan, Kitsune said, "I hate my name. Please don't say it." Fighting off her poutiness, Lizyra said, "I love your name. Every time I have to call you Kitsune I feel like I'm addressing the entire fox race and all its ancestors." With a bit of royal sneer, Kitsune said correctively, "It would be the Canidae race, that I'm only a part of since it covers demi-human wolves, dogs, foxes, etc." Returning an almost identical royal sass, Osiris said, "Please enlighten us with your royal education, your highness." Highly annoyed by everyone's bickering, Isaac said with a sass of his own, "I don't know what's gotten into everyone the past few weeks but fighting amongst yourselves does nobody any good." In a sinister inquiry, Adele quipped, "Though you seem to be impervious to astrological bullshit, it seems everyone else is suffering from the effects of Elverta going into hummus around the planet." With an educational inquiry of her own, Kitsune said still buried underneath a haystack of fur, "It's retrograde, not hummus. And that stuff is all made up by astrologists to justify devious behavior under the false pretense that the moon made them fucking do it instead of taking responsibility for their actions." Pouring the last bit of silver nitrate into the fountain bowl, Isaac said while he closed the tap, "As much as I don't want to believe in it, I've seen mages utilize the magic of the stars and heal people, let alone conjure magic warping space and time derived of it." Looking up at him, Lizyra asked, "What when the moon retrogrades into hummus?" Pushing against the bridge of his nose, he said, "No, from the essence that resonates from the stars. I've seen astrologian mages do things on the battlefield not even wizards, sorcerers, or component-based spellcasters could achieve. That spell you used to flatten Osiris's testicles into a pancake is actually derived of such essence." Curiously, Adele asked, "How you a magicless pleb like you know something like that?" Pushing against the bridge of his nose, he said, "No, from the essence that resonates from the stars. I've seen astrologian mages do things on the battlefield not even wizards." Pushing against the bridge of his nose, he said, "No, from the essence that resonates from the stars. I've seen astrological mages do things on the battlefield not even wizards, sorcerers, or component-based spellcasters could achieve. That spell you used to flatten Osiris's testicles into a pancake is actually derived of such essence." Curiously, Adele asked, "How you a magicless pleb like you know something like that?" Setting the "Like you know something like that?" Curiously, Adele asked, "How would a magicless pleb like you know something like that?" Setting the keg on the ground, Isaac responded, "Just because I don't use magic doesn't mean I don't know the basics about it. Butting in, Lizyra said, "That's not true. Master Theo told me he was able to teach you one spell." Looking away in shame, Isaac said, "The one spell he taught me was how to counter your tree transfiguration bullshit, and without a wand, ingredients, and a full day's rest afterward there's no point in trying to cast it." Unbeknownst to anyone, all the silver nitrate had drained into a reservoir below them and weighed enough to trigger a pressure plate that activated a series of hidden gears throughout the temple entrance. Isaac stopped talking mid-sentence as the floor beneath him shook and both statues began crying a steady flow of silver nitrate back into the bowls they were holding. A series of exposed cogs on the other doors began turning while a small spherical indention revealed itself, hiding outer side of the doors began turning while a small spherical indention revealed itself, hiding away its cover inside the door as everything came to a rumbling halt. Poking her head up from within the fur of her tail, Kitsune's ears twitched as she said, "No way that fucking worked." Reaching up, Lizyra slid the jewel in her hand into the new slot. After hearing it click as it locked into place, she stood up and waited for something else to happen. After standing in silence for a few minutes, Adele asked, "What now?" Flipping the tome back open, Isaac turned through its pages and said, "I think that was supposed to be it. The door should have opened by now." Pulling her head back within the warm of her tail, Kitsune said, "Well, that was fun." Pulling her head back within the warmth of her tail, Kitsune said, "Well, that was fun. I'm going back to sleep." An electronic hum thudded from the other side of the door as the chiseled magic circles and insignias came to life with ethereal blue glow. The door suddenly started slowly retracting. Ethereal blue glow. The door suddenly started slowly retracting into the ceiling as the floors shook once again, nearly knocking everyone but Adele and Kitsune off their feet. The rumbling came to a halt as a foul smell escaped from behind the door and graced everyone's nostrils as the door disappeared into the workings of the ceiling. A series of torches on both sides of the hallway ways suddenly ignited into flames of jade, continuously lighting further.
The hallway ways. The hallway ways. Probably shouldn't write this shit when I'm stoned out of my mind.
Suddenly ignited into flames of jade, continuously lighting further into the temple sconce by sconce. The stone walls were almost perfect cut blocks of untouched stone and flickered in hues of blue under the flame's light. Isaac looked up toward the archway above them and shouted, "Hey Nox, if anyone shows up other than Imperial soldiers, just go ahead and eat them." Angered, Lizyra called up to him, "No eating anyone. If someone shows up, just stay up and hide after letting out a big roar and we'll come running." Nox rolled over and grunted as he pulled his tail up from hanging over the edge and wrapped it around himself as he went back to sleep. Taking a step into the temple, Isaac suggested, "I recommend you grab everything you need now, like food, water, and even take a piss before we venture too deep." Hopping off the stone she had been laying on, Kitsune said, "I've got the emergency satchel just in case. I've also brought extra scrolls, potions, antidotes, and in the most extreme of emergencies, I even brought a teleportation scroll that will teleport us out in case the door shuts on us." Adele asked curiously, "Oh, where to?" Kitsune's facial expression changed as she said, "It's not ideal, but it will teleport us to the front hall of the Kitsune estate back at the capital. My dad gave it to me back when I left with Theo and joined the caravan. He said if things ever got rough, feel free to abandon my friends and return home to safety." Osiris said sarcastically, "Such a friendly guy." Shoving a bunch of the things she had pulled out to show everyone, back into the satchel around her neck, Kitsune squawked, "Be quiet. The only reason you don't like him is because he wouldn't acknowledge your nobility." Rummaging through the inner pockets of his trench coat, Osiris said, "I'd say it's a pretty good reason to detested the man. Just because he's never heard of my homeland doesn't mean he can discredit my heritage." Walking past shoving a bunch of the things she had pulled out to show everyone, back into the satchel around her neck. Kitsune squawked, "Be quiet, the only reason you don't like him is because he wouldn't acknowledge your nobility." Rummaging through the inner pockets of his trench coat, Osiris said, "I'd say it's a pretty good reason to detest the man. Just because he's never heard of my homeland doesn't mean he can discredit my heritage." Walking past him into the temple entrance, Kitsune said, "Well, you couldn't even point to it on a map, so could you blame him?" Pulling out a long flintlock pistol, Osiris said while looking it over, "I can't help it was raised to the ground when I was just a boy. That was hundreds of years ago. You expect me to remember where it was when it's been erased from every map on every continent?" Isaac said as he pulled a torch from his back belt and lit it with a striking rod, "Please, it hasn't been over 100 years. Last time I spoke with your mother, she said worrying about you and Lizyra was going to be the death of her before either of you made it to 100. Touting her own horn, Adele said, "I'm pretty sure I have everything we'll ever need in one of my temporal storages. In fact," she said while tilting her head, "I actually have half the inventory of Wormspire's watch in one of them. Fuck. Morik's going to be pissed." Osiris assured her, "Morik and Torgan will be fine. They have plenty of toys and trinkets to play with while we're gone." Lizyra took 2 steps into the entrance hall and looked around. "This looks really nice for how shabby the outside looks." Kitsune said while everyone piled into the entrance hall, "Hold on everyone. Let's follow standard of procedure." All within the same breath, she held up her staff and said, "Presidium. Testa. Benedicit. Claritate." Orbs of different colored light embraced everyone's bodies and then faded as the next one appeared and vanished, eventually only leaving behind the sound of the magic's low residual hum. Upon the activation of Claritate, Lizyra felt an electric fire surge across her body. Her mind swelled as the room around her morphed into a high spire's spiral staircase. Flames came crashing through the wall as she tried to evade and jumped to the floor. Within the blink of an eye it was all gone and she was sitting on the cold stone floor looking up at everyone. Concern laced her face as Kitsune asked, "What in the hells was that all about, Lizyra?" Looking around the room to make sure it really wasn't caving in, Lizyra said while rising to her feet, "I think I just had a vision or a memory or something." "Strange," Adele said, "of what exactly?" Lizyra took one last look around the room under the green light and said, "Was like a staircase caving in or exploding." Walking past her further into the temple, Isaac asked, "What are you, like an oracle now or something?" Lizyra frowned and said, "I don't know, everything still kinda tastes like farts and feels weird ever since that potion I was forced to drink. Maybe one of the spells Kitsune just cast is somehow still messing with that." Taking a sip from a mana restoration potion, Kitsune said, "Not to keep touting my education, but there's no way that potion would have lasted this long. I mean, there are definitely potions out there that could, but given these were common street thugs that kidnapped Nox, I highly doubt they had such a relic." Holding her staff tightly, Lizyra responded with a sad look, "You're not the one whose favorite foods currently taste like someone's ass." Almost innocently, Kitsune said, "Ever since you've been saying that, I've been having a hard time with the analogy you keep using, since I've never tasted someone's ass or farts." Irritated, Isaac asked, "Can we proceed before the spells and enchantments wear off?" Isaac began walking down the corridor through the entrance hall while everyone followed behind him. Raising his torch in front of him, he called out, "Osiris, take the rear." Rummaging through his trench coat and pulling out a small crystal from a pouch that was already shining brightly, he fastened it to a holster-like spot on his belt, letting it illuminate the area around him. Wiping the sweat from her forehead, Lizyra said, "It's really warm in here." Sweat from her forehead, Lizyra said, "It's really warm in here and smells terrible." Adele said in response to comment, "Maybe if you weren't wearing so much clothes, you'd be a little cooler. You are wearing your robe, cloak, and the new uniform Isaac made, and it's hardly winter yet." "I like my old robe though," Lizyra protested. "And I also like my new uniform too." Following the closest behind Isaac, Kitsune said, "I'd ditch the robe. As traditional as it is, it's just going to get in the way during combat. And the new uniforms Isaac made everyone were enchanted with pretty much the same spells. So, I'd say you are a bit overdressed, Liz." Kitsune's hood was up on her black cloak and had little slits for her long fox-like ears to poke through. She was wearing the new green and black tunic with the black leggings. The brown emergency satchel hung by her side underneath her cloak while she used her dragonwood staff as a walking stick. Her bushy tail casually swayed back and forth, occasionally kicking up the bottom of her cloak and skirt. Still laying on her back with one leg draped over the other, Adele floated alongside Lizyra, crossing her arms behind her head. Even though she wasn't wearing her new tunic or leggings, she was wearing the black cloak and boots Isaac made part of the uniform. Instead of his usual plated vest and shoulder guards, Isaac wore studded dragon hide with his black cloak, giving room for the assortment of belts bearing random gadgets, gizmos, and artifacts from previous expeditions strapped across his chest. Fastened to the best around his waist hung a coiled diamond wire whip, similar to the one Zara used in her hook-shot gauntlets. His great sword clung to his back underneath his cloak in a fitted harness bearing 2 brightly arcanix crystals in its hilt. Osiris' uniform was barely visible as it was hidden behind his brown trench coat, which was hardly noticeable for once as it itself was hidden underneath the same cloak everyone else wore. In one hand was his long barrel flintlock that was resting on his shoulder. A door similar to the entrance door began slowly ascending into the ceiling with a faint rumble as everyone approached it. Holding his fist up signaling everyone to halt, Isaac held his torch further out in front of him and waited for the door to fully open. Another series of torches came to life on the walls behind the door as it fully became flush with the ceiling. The room was larger than the first and was full of crates and barrels that were neatly stacked as if they had been dropped off from a prior delivery. One box near the back of the room looked as if it had been pried open and was on its side in contrast to the rest of the crates. Everyone entered the room and began fanning out, each walking down their own row of boxes but still close enough to Isaac's or Osiris's light. Grabbing the grimoire from her belt, Lizyra tossed in the air next to her and said, "Sequi." Before the book could hit the floor, it became engulfed in a blue light and began floating open on the first page next to her. The blue glow faded as the grimoire hung in the air but suddenly started glowing with a continuous bright white as she said, "Luciat." Noticing something odd, Lizyra pointed out, "I think it sounds more like the woods in here than it does outside in the actual woods." "Must you always point out every obvious little thing?" Osiris complained from across the room. Adele said, "I think Liz has a valid point. I'm also hearing cicadas and shit, but we haven't seen one plant, insect, or living thing yet." Approaching the open crate, Isaac noticed the floor next to it was littered with unlit torches. Kneeling next to it, he peered in the open side, noticing it was half filled with more unlit torches. Looking over his right shoulder, he noticed another room with an open doorway, illuminated by more mounted torches. Rising to his
God,
feet,
that
he
paragraph
said,
had
"Nothing
torches
really
in
of
it 3
interest in here.
times.
Looks like some kind of storage or maybe a delivery from a time long past. Best if we press on." Lizyra asked, "Why would a place that only opens a few times a year, if you have the key and a bunch of silver nitrate, need supply deliveries? Especially since no one has lived here in eons." Kitsune chimed in and said, "I've also noticed the lack of dust or any sign of natural decay in here. If I didn't know better, I'd say these crates and barrels were dropped off recently." A green rift tore open with a black electric hum and swallowed a box next to Adele before it clapped shut out of existence. With a stern snap, Isaac asked, "What the hell are you doing, Adele? We aren't here to pillage the temple." Floating over to Isaac as her cape dangled toward the floor behind her, she said, "I'm not pillaging anything." Isaac as her cape dangled toward the floor behind her, she said, "I'm not pillaging anything. It's for research purposes. This seems like some kind of anomaly Maya would get a nerd boner over." Biting his lower lip, Isaac responded, "Tell me before you do something like that again. You could accidentally trigger a trap." Rolling her eyes at him, Adele said, "You think everything could be a trap?" She floated past him while her cloak caught the edge of a crate, causing her to stumble through the air. Instinctively, Isaac threw his torch to the side on the ground and caught her in her arms, cradling her like an oversized toddler. Embarrassed, she kicked off his chest and floated his arm. She floated, rolling her eyes at him. Adele said, "You think everything could be a trap?" She floated past him while her cloak caught the edge of a crate, causing her to stumble through the air. Instinctively, Isaac threw his torch to the side on the ground and caught her in his arms, cradling her like an oversized toddler. Embarrassed, she kicked off his chest and floated above him and said, "That was completely unnecessary."
Unaccessory.
Remnants of a campfire centered in a neatly placed rock circle, surrounded by 4 fully clothed skeletons. Approaching their remains, Adele said, "Looks like we found the research team." Kitsune knelt next to the campfire, laying her staff on the ground and began a prayer. After a few moments, a thin gold magic circle surrounded the entire little campsite and then vanished as she finished. She picked up her staff and said, "Just in case they were to decide to try and come back to life later." Osiris began rummaging through their pockets and belongings while Kitsune grew angry and said, "How disrespectful of you." Shamelessly, he said, "They're dead and there's a chance they could have something useful." He moved to the next body and continued to say, "And there's always a chance they found the Ember Shard but didn't make it out in time." Grimly, Lizyra said, "I hope that doesn't become us." As he finished searching through the last body's belongings, Osiris said, "Don't worry, even if we get locked in, Kitsune still has the teleport back to Daddy's warm embrace for us." With a sour face hidden under her hood, Adele said, "I'd rather die in her than ever go back to the capital." With a sour face hidden under her hood, Adele said, "I'd rather die in here than ever go back to the capital." Kitsune said, "In your elf form nobody would ever know you were a halfling." With an unempathetic chuckle, Osiris said, "Any Imperial soldier or guard in their right mind would Soldier." With an unempathetic chuckle, Osiris said, "Soldier or guard in their..."
What the fuck is happening? What the fuck is happening? What the fuck is happening?
Looking at one of the bodies, with a Kitsune said, "In your elf form nobody would ever know you were a halfling." With an unempathetic chuckle, Osiris said, "Any Imperial soldier or guard in their right mind would take one look at her and have her arrested for indecent exposure." Looking at one of the bodies, Adele said, "Nothing about my body right now is indecent. If I were to retract all my digital camouflage you see now, you'd never be the same afterward. You'd most likely even fall out of love with your sister." In a morbid snarl, Osiris said, "Watch it, imp. If you further disgust me there will be consequences. Unlike Vlad, I won't easily fall victim to your predictable whims and tricks." In a morbid snarl, Osiris said, "Watch it, imp. If you further disgust me there will be consequences. Unlike Vlad, I won't easily fall victim to your predictable whims and tricks." Walking around and inspecting the perimeter of the room, Lizyra said, "I think I've figured it out." Everyone looked over at her curiously as Isaac asked, "What did you figure out?" "Why Osiris is so cranky all the time and an asshole." Amused, Osiris asked, "Oh? And why is that?" With her hands clutched tougher behind her back holding her staff as she walked, she said, tight behind her. With her hand amused, Osiris asked, "Oh? And why is that?" With her hands clutched tight behind her back holding her staff as she walked, she said, "Probably because he's a big old dumb virgin and Osiris probably isn't." Everyone else besides Osiris erupted in laughter, while he stood there red in the face and said, "There's no way you could ever know that. And seeing that you are still a whelp with Isaac as your overlord, you yourself are a sexless brat." With a heavy sigh, Isaac said, inspecting a large set of closed double wooden doors leading into the next room, "It amuses me as much as everyone bickers and cries about each other, that all of you would still rather be in the same room at all times than be apart." Leaning down to inspect the door handles he continued, "And in all my years as a squire before the collapse of Enos, and as a mercenary running chores for the Empire before we started this little charade, not even the meanest non-feral troll, or the most hateful Imperial Guard could conjure up the hurtful things you all casually say to each other. Joining him next to the door, Adele said, I still blame the moon becoming hummus. When Lizyra was little, she used to follow Osiris around attached at the hip calling him Big O and Osira Little O. There must have been a point everything changed when I was rotated out and watching over Wormspire's watch back when it was just a workshop. Inspecting a bucket that she suspected to once be a makeshift toilet from across the room to anyone, Lizyra said, I think my defining moment into adulthood was taking a shit in the bushes for the first time in the field and not on some kind of toilet with toilet paper. After that, I knew life wasn't a bunch of Osiris but shit-stained Osirises instead. Osiris said, I can only imagine getting locked in her, and these are the conversations we have until we starve to death. Here and the Osiris said, I can only imagine getting locked in here, and these are the conversations we have until we starve to death. Reassuringly, Adele said, I have enough supplies and food in one of my temporal storage rifts that even if we got locked in we could survive here without having to escape to Kitsune's mansion. Standing next to Isaac, Kitsune sassied, it's not a mansion.
Sassied.
Adele rebutted and said, it's the biggest private estate outside the royal castle. I think calling it a mansion would be an understatement. Kiston responded, everyone acts like it's... Kitsune responded, everyone acts like it's some grand castle that I'd rather run back to, but I assure you I too would rather not go back. I'd rather shit in the bushes alongside Lizyra wiping my ass with my hand than have to go back and live there with my siblings being a servant to the Empire. But if we are in danger, escaping back to there and immediately leaving doesn't sound like a bad alternative than living here for a year waiting to be able to open the door living off Adele's.
Guess my E key must be broken because every here has become her.
Here for a year waiting to be able to open the door living off Adele's secret stash of snacks and liquor. Curious and a bit concerned, Adele said, I think the moon has been affecting Kitsune the most. She's usually so sweet and docile. Now she's starting to sound more like Lizyra. Leaning closer towards Kitsune, Adele whispered, you didn't have like some kind of crazy dream with Owl where you woke up holding a stone? Owl, curious and a bit concerned, Adele said, I think the moon has been affecting Kitsune the most. She's usually so sweet and docile. Now she's starting to sound more like Lizyra. Leaning closer towards Kitsune, Adele whispered, you didn't have like some kind of crazy dream with an owl where you woke up holding a stone recently, did ya? Like Lizyra. Kitsune leaned in closer to Adele and replied, no. The last dream I had I was eating a delicious donut, and when I looked down at it, it turned out to be some kind of bug. With a bit of disgust, Adele said, how unfortunate. Not really, Kitsune said. It was probably the most delicious thing I've ever tasted. After enough inspection, Isaac pushed one of the doors open, revealing an even larger, completely dark, open room. Stepping inside, he said, there isn't even one torch mounted on the wall. Everyone else stepped inside, their various light sources illuminating more the room around them. Adele floated towards the center of the room and saw a giant statue of a tree. Everyone else stepped inside, center of the room, and saw a giant statue of a tree. It towered up almost touching the ceiling with its leaves, while at the base of its canopy was 6 individual branches symmetrically jutting out centered around its trunk, each individually holding one of 6 unlit torches. Kicking it with one of her feet, she said, well, ain't this an interesting old hunk of junk? Osiris stood underneath it and said, to think goblins built this place and took the time to carve something like this is bizarre. Kneeling down and inspecting its roots that seemed to be puncturing through the stone floor, Kitsune said, it appears to be more petrified than something that was carved by hand. She removed a small vial from a pouch on her belt, uncorked it and poured a little of it on one of the roots. Observing the root, kneeling down and inspecting its roots that seemed to be puncturing through the stone floor, Kitsune said, it appears to be more petrified than something that was carved by hand. She removed a small vial from a pouch on her belt, uncorked it and poured a little of it on one of the roots. Observing the root while nothing happened, she said, maybe not, while recorking the vial and placing it back in its pouch on her belt. Reaching up with his torch, Isaac tried lighting the closet torch to him being held by a tree branch. Adele floated towards the center of the room and saw a giant statue of a tree. It towered up almost touching the ceiling with its leaves while at the Reaching up with his torch, Isaac tried lighting the closest torch to him being held by a tree branch. After a moment he moved the torch around and said, "Okay, this isn't lighting even though it looks ready to go." He slowly walked around the tree and tried lighting the other torches one by one, and to his surprise none of them would light. Upon trying to light the last one, it instantly caught and burned like it had always been lit. "Strange," he said. Osiris walked over to the first torch Isaac had tried to light and began trying to light it with his flint striker. After a few failed attempts he moved to the next one and began trying. "Odd indeed," he agreed. The floor around the tree was littered with hundreds if not thousands of spent torches. As Lizyra's boots crackled over them, she walked out of the room. Adele turned and asked, "Where's she going?" She walked out of the room. Adele turned. "Odd indeed," he agreed. The floor around the tree was littered with hundreds if not thousands of spent torches as Lizyra's boots crackled over them, as she walked out of the room. Adele turned and asked, "Where's she going?" Osiris said with a laugh, "Probably to go shit in the bushes outside." After a moment she returned holding a green torch from the previous room and walked up to the tree and tried to light the first torch. "I borrowed this from off the wall in the other room. Let's see if it lights any of them." In much the same fashion as before she tried lighting each one until the one instantly lit up in the same jade green flame as the torch she was holding. Kitsune said while thinking out loud, "Okay, so it's some kind of pattern based on colored flames." Walking the edge of the room, Isaac saw another set of doors, one on the western wall, and one to the south. Upon Lizyra lighting the green torch, eastern door suddenly began opening and ascended into the ceiling. Eastern door suddenly began opening and ascended into the ceiling. Kitsune said while thinking out loud, "Okay, so it's some kind of pattern based on colored flames." Walking the edge of the room, Isaac saw another set of doors, one on the western wall, and one to the south. Upon Lizyra lighting the green torch, the eastern door suddenly began opening and ascended into the ceiling. Everyone looked over while Lizyra exclaimed, "Hold on," and ran out of the room returning without the green torch. Osiris asked, "You put it back?" Instantly Lizyra responded, "Yeah. I'm not going to keep holding it. Plus, I don't want to desecrate the temple by just leaving it on the ground." Walking into the next room, the bottom of Isaac's boots became saturated in something wet. Something metallic. The floor was slightly flooded with silver nitrate that shined like mercury as the light from Isaac's torch danced upon it. Kitsune's tail brushed across the top of a large puddle and she said, "Fuck." Grabbing her tail and trying to wipe it off, the silver stained her fur as she tried to tuck part of her tail into her belt to prevent it from happening again. Lizyra asked, "Is it toxic?" "Not generally," Kitsune responded. "But after prolonged exposure it can be." The room was completely empty with no torches mounted on the wall as Isaac crossed it. Coming up to another set of doors he examined them before pressing them open. The second the door opened a flurry of half-decayed rats came scurrying out startling him. One of them started trying to scurry up his pant leg as he knocked it off and flattened it in one stomp of his boot. Bone and decayed mush spattered against the floor as Kitsune held her staff up and said, "Sanctificare." A holy vibrant light shot out of her body in spherical radius around her that instantly sublimated the zombified rats. Looking into the room, spherical radius. One of them started trying to scurry up his pant leg as he knocked it off and flattened it in one stomp of his boot. Bone and decayed mush spattered against the floor as Kitsune held her staff up and said, "Sanctificare." A wholly vibrant light shot out of her body in a spherical radius around her that instantly sublimated the zombified rats upon touching them. Looking into the room, to make sure there was no more surprises, Isaac said, "Looks like some kind of dining room." Everyone entered the room and the torches on the wall ignited into the same jade-colored light as before. The table was set in awaiting the arrival of its many-course meals that never came. Each chair was neatly tucked in underneath the long wooden table that traversed the room. All but one chair, that was toppled over with one broken leg that was laying silently nearby. Adele started floating towards the center of the room while a stone door to the north started rising up into the ceiling. As the door opened, a blood-red light flooded her vision as the door vanished like the others into the ceiling. Floating over to the newly opened room, she noticed it was the epitome of what a dragon's treasure horse would be.
Horse.
Chests and piles of gold littered the hoard. Adele started floating towards the center of the room while a stone door to the north started rising up into the ceiling. As the door opened, a blood-red light flooded her vision as the door vanished like the others into the ceiling. Floating over to the newly opened room, she noticed it was the epitome of what a dragon's treasure hoard would be. Chests and piles of gold littered the room like the glistening golden dunes of a desert. Before Isaac could say a word, Adele squawked, Yeah, I know, it's obviously a trap. No one would ever leave behind such wealth if it wasn't." A bit concerned, Kitsune said, "Could be just that no one's ever made it out that's ever entered this place." "Either or," Isaac said, "I don't want to find out, so Adele, if you would." Adele snatched a red torch off the wall and floated back out toward the tree statue, lighting the torch next to the green one. Without having to try and light every other torch, this one instantly lit up and burned the same blood red as the torch in her hand. "Easy peasy," she said as she floated back to remount the torch on the wall in the treasure room. Walking south from the dining room, Osiris noticed a wooden door ripped off from its hinges and lying across the floor. He peeked his head in the next room and said, "Found the kitchen." Lizyra obliviously walked into the room and said, "Only green torches in here." Looking over in the corner next to a fire. "Torches in here." Looking over in the corner next to a fireplace and stove, she saw another flooding of silver nitrate with a skeleton warped in a cloak residing in it. She walked over to the fireplace and looked up its chimney and said, "I wonder if that goes all the way up to the roof outside and this is how those rats got in." She began shouting up the chimney and said, "Nox, can you hear me?" Her voice echoed for a while but fell silent with no reply. She said as she walked away, inspecting the random counters, shelves, ovens, and stove tops. "This place looks relatively modern for being thousands of years old." Everyone funneled back into the room with the statue, and a door to the south slowly started opening upon the arrival. Osiris said, "I can't tell if it's because of us lighting those torches or if these doors are just randomly opening due to the eclipse." "Whatever's doing it," Isaac said, "I have yet to see this ember's hard I spoke of. And without it we will not receive pay." Lizyra pay. "Whatever," Osiris said, "I can't tell if it's because of us lighting those torches or if these doors are just randomly opening due to the eclipse." "Whatever's doing it," Isaac said, "I have yet to see this ember shard I spoke of. And without it we will not receive the rest of the pay." Lizyra said, "I'd hate to think it's back in those puddles of silver nitrate somewhere and we'd have to get on our hands and knees and search for it." Osiris asked, "If that were the case, couldn't you just use some wind magic and blow all the liquid away?" Walking into a skinny hallway on the opposite side of the opened door, Lizyra said, "I could, I guess." She stopped and glanced at an open winding staircase that led up to another level while everyone else gathered around her. "Should we go up?" she suggested. "No," Isaac said. "Standard of procedure is to clear the current floor before going to another one." He walked past her and continued down the hallway into a room that had a few bunk beds aligned against the back wall. Finely carved dressers of deep blue and purple magic wood sat in front of every double bunk with a large vibrant otherworldly blue rug sprawled out across the floor. Only against the back wall were a series of blue torches burning radiantly against the darkness. To the west, there was a skinnier stone door with a staircase leading down to it. Isaac removed a blue torch from the wall with his free hand and said, "Stay here. I have a feeling this door is going to open after lighting one of those torches." He walked out of the room while Lizyra said, "This place is so fascinating. I see why Maya was so interested in it." She suddenly toppled across one of the bunks and sprawled out in a pool of sweat within a moist flop. From her neck down was completely saturated as if she had been standing in the rain. She yawned and said, "I'm already tired." Rolling over, she noticed staring at her from the bunk next to her, looking her dead in the eyes, was the shallow and hollow eye sockets of a skeleton gripping its blanket tight. With a gloomy look in her eyes, she stared back at it while Adele floated over and asked, "Find yourself a boyfriend over there." Lizyra said, "I'm pretty sure there isn't anyone would ever be interested in me." Adele responded, "Come on, didn't your mama ever tell ya there's someone for everyone out there, you just gotta look?" Frowning, Lizyra said, "My mother and father died in a fire when Enos was sieged. If we hadn't been the lowest of the noble families, maybe they would have survived and introduced me to a prince or something by now." She sat up on the bunk and stretched before standing and said, "But seeing as they died when I was itty bitty, I don't even remember them, so no, my mama never told me that." Looking over the skeleton in the neighboring bed, Adele said, "Yeah, I don't remember my mom either, so she never said that, but I've heard Morik and Torgan say it a bunch." The skinny stone door began opening upon Isaac's return as everyone watched him enter the room
Skinny
holding his
stone door.
The skinny stone door began opening upon Isaac's return as everyone watched him enter the room holding his torch and the blue torch. The door slowly raised and everyone noticed the room was hardly big enough for everyone to stand.
Hardly
big enough for everyone to stand comfortably in. And the only thing in it was a low-hanging chandelier. No torches on the wall, no skeletons hugging their blankets. A lone and longing to be lit chandelier. Without even thinking, Isaac walked down the steps and up to it and touched one of the unlit candles with the blue torch. It instantly lit up in blue flame. Then suddenly each candle lit one by one on their own, sporting their own blue flame. In the same instant a loud crash echoed out from down the hallway as if someone had knocked something from a shelf. "Oh," Lizyra said. Walking away from the chandelier, Isaac remounted the blue torch in its original sconce and said, "That definitely wasn't the ember's heart." Everybody walking away.
This definitely isn't hair removal. What? Nothing?
From the chandelier. Walking away from the chandelier, Isaac remounted the blue torch in its original sconce and said, "That definitely wasn't the ember shard." Everybody abruptly laughed despite the temple's gloominess while Isaac asked, "What?" Adele said, "It's unlike you to say something funny. Like, ever." Drawing his great sword from his back with one hand, he said, "I can be funny." Lizyra strolled out of the room, down the hallway, and back into the center room with the tree statue and said, "Sounded like it came from this way." Before anyone could catch up, she continued her stroll into the dining area and noticed it. From the corner of her Lizyra strolled out of the room, down the hallway, and back into the center room with the tree statue and said, "Sounded like it came from this way." Before anyone could catch up, she continued her stroll into the dining area and noticed it. From the corner of her eye, slouched over in the corner, was black cloaked skeleton, shining party in bright silver from From the corner of her eye, slouched over in the corner, was a black cloaked skeleton, shining partly in bright silver from the puddle it had been lying in early while dormant. It stood in the corner silently. Before anyone could catch up, she continued her stroll into the dining area and noticed it. From the corner of her eye, slouched over in the corner, was a black cloaked skeleton, shining partly in bright silver from the puddle it had been. From the peripheral of her eye, slouched over in the corner, was a black cloaked skeleton, shining partly in bright silver from the puddle it had been lying in earlier while dormant. It stood in the corner silently facing the wall. Everyone else pulled behind Lizyra as Isaac said sternly. You really need to learn how to wait for everyone else before frolicking off like that. Without a word, Lizyra just raised her arm and pointed at the thing in the corner, ignoring them. Isaac looked over and observed it before whispering, "What the fuck is that?" Bluntly, Osiris called out to it, "Hey fuck stick, what in the hells are you doing?" It stood in the corner and continued facing the wall while Kitsune stepped forward and began muttering a spell. The instant it heard her voice, it turned and with a wretched scream, bellowed out across from them, leaping in the air towards Kitsune. In a jolt of fear, Kitsune stumbled over her words, negating the spell as Isaac swatted it away with a swing from his sword, whacking it across the room against the wall. The skeleton hissed as it raised its hands and a purple light shot from between them, vaulting across the room. The skeleton hissed as it raised its hands.
My mouse is so fucked.
Its hands and a purple light shot from between them, vaulting across the room. Raising both her hands, a void cracked open in front of them, swallowing the blast, while a second void opened near the creature, launching its attack back at it. The creature collapsed into a shadow on the ground and moved across the room with lightning speed. Without any time to react, it pulled underneath Lizyra and set her ablaze. Raising both her hands, a void cracked open in front of them, swallowing the blast, while a second void opened near the creature, launching its attack back at it. The creature collapsed into a shadow on the ground and moved across the room with lightning speed. Without any time to react, it pulled underneath Lizyra and set her ablaze in a black flame. The skeleton, it stood in the corner and continued facing the wall while Kitsune stepped forward and began muttering a spell. The instant it heard her voice, it turned and with a wretched scream, bellowed out across from them, leaping in the air towards Kitsune. In a jolt of fear, Kitsune stumbled over her words, negating the spell as Isaac swatted it away with a swing from his sword, whacking it across the room against the wall. The skeleton hissed as it raised its hands and a purple light shot from between them, vaulting across the room. Raising both her hands, a void cracked open in front of them, swallowing the blast, while a second void opened near the creature, launching its attack back at it. The creature collapsed into a shadow on the ground, avoided the attack, and moved across the room with lightning speed. Raising both her hands, a void cracked open in front of them, swallowing the blast, while a second void opened near the creature, launching its attack back at it. The creature collapsed into a shadow on the ground, avoiding the attack, and moved across the room with lightning speed. Without any time to react, it pulled underneath Lizyra and set her ablaze in a black flame. Trying to jump out of the way, Lizyra fell to the ground in flames and suddenly threw off her robe as she rolled across the floor. Surprisingly, her new cloak was unharmed, but her sweat-soaked robes continued to burn furiously in the black, unnatural flames. The creature manifested back into its skeletal form where Lizyra had been standing and raised its hands again. Another purple light blasted from its hands at her. Without even trying to avoid it, the blast Raising both her hands, a void cracked open in front of them, swallowing the blast, while a second void opened near the creature, launching its attack back at it. The creature collapsed into a shadow on the ground, avoiding the attack, and moved across the room with lightning speed. Without any time to react, it pooled underneath Lizyra and set her ablaze in a black flame. Trying to jump out of the way, Lizyra fell to the ground in flames. The skeleton hissed as it raised its hands, and a purple light shot from between them, vaulting across the room. Raising both her hands, a void cracked open in front of them, swallowing the blast, while a second void opened near the creature, launching its attack back at it. The creature collapsed into a shadow on the ground. Raising both her hands, Adele summoned a void that cracked open in front of them, swallowing the blast, while a second void opened near the creature, launching its attack back at it. The creature collapsed into a shadow on the ground, avoiding the attack, and moved across the room with lightning speed. Without any time for her to react, it pooled underneath Lizyra and set her ablaze in a black flame. Trying to jump out of the way, Lizyra fell to the ground in flames and suddenly threw off her robe as she rolled across the floor. Surprisingly, her new cloak was unharmed, but her sweat-soaked robes continued to burn furiously in the black, unnatural flames. The creature manifested back into its skeletal form where Lizyra had been standing and raised its hands again, while another purple light blasted from them at her. Without even trying to avoid it, the blast ricocheted against an invisible magic field surround her body and ended up dissipating into the ceiling. The creature, raising both her hands.
Oh my fuck,
the
come
creature
on.
manifested back into its skeletal form where Lizyra had been standing and raised its hands again, while another purple light blasted from them at her. Without even trying to avoid it, the blast ricocheted against an invisible magic field surrounding her body and ended up dissipating into the ceiling. The creature howled in anger as a black ghostly sword manifested in both its hands. It leapt at Lizyra but suddenly vanished into smoke, while a divine bolt of lightning came crashing down from the ceiling at it. Lightning came crashing down from the ceiling at it. Manifesting around the room, it avoided each divine bolt as Kitsune repeatedly chanted. It avoided each divine bolt, manifesting around the room. It avoided each divine bolt as Kitsune repeatedly chanted, Divina Fulgur. Leaping from smoke to shadow around the room, dodging her attacks, the creature suddenly slammed into the wall as a black fiery magic bolt crashed into it after being launched from Adele's hands. She laughed and demanded, "Stand still, you little shit." She snapped her fingers after the creature had been hit by her spell, and a black explosion rippled across its chest. The creature bellowed in pain but was interrupted by a barrage of bullets that began ripping through its bones as Osiris fired shots from his long barrel pistol before its cylinder ran dry. A vibrant purple magic circle illuminated around the monster as it began to chant a spell, but its body suddenly combusted into flames and exploded as Lizyra shouted from across the room, "Explodera." Its body shredded into shrapnel while its head leapt off its body, sprouting bat-like wings and igniting into black flames. Kitsune suddenly shouted, "What the fuck?" In the same moment Isaac said, "I've never seen anything like that in my entire fucking life." The flying flaming skull shivered loudly, repeatedly clanking its jaw together as it flew madly at Lizyra, only to be struck down by a divine bolt of lightning. Struck down by a divine bolt of lightning. Recoiling back in fear as it hit the floor, Lizyra asked, "Is it dead?" Uneasily, Adele said, "I think it was dead from the beginning." The creature lied there unmoving while it continued to burn with flame. Everyone stood there in silence for a moment before Osiris said, "I think it's dead." "Like dead, dead." Floating over to it cautiously, Adele kicked it with the tip of her boot, sending it across the room before it rolled to a stop and continued to burn. "I'd hate to say it," Isaac said, "but there's our fifth flame." Pulling a candle from the candelabra on the dining table, Adele held it up to the burning skull and lit it. She causally floated out of the room and lit one of the torches on the tree with it. Casually floated out of the room and lit one of the torches on the tree with it, sending it into a black brilliant flame. She tossed the candle to the floor and asked, "What now?" "I'd hate to say it," Isaac said, "but there's our fifth flame." Pulling a candle from the candelabra on the dining table, Adele held it up to the burning skull and lit it. She casually floated out of the room and lit one of the torches on the tree with it, sending it into a black brilliant flame. She tossed the candle to the floor and asked, "What now?" "We've been in every room." "We never went up the staircase," Lizyra said, walking back into the room after her. Entering the room, Isaac said, "I guess that's where we head next." Making their way to the staircase down. Where we head next. Making their way to the staircase down the hall, they heard a noise coming from the room with.
They're heard.
They heard. Making their way to the staircase down the hall, they heard a noise coming from the room with the blue torch. Upon sticking her head in, Lizyra noticed that the chandelier in the tiny. Entering the room, Isaac said, "I guess that's where we head next." Making their way to the staircase down the hall, they heard a noise coming from the room with the blue torch. Upon sticking her head through the doorway, Lizyra noticed that the chandelier in the tiny room was now burning purple. "Guys," she called out. "Looks like the chandelier is burning purple now." Gathering back into the room around the doorway, Adele said with a sign, "Let me go get that candle." "No need," Isaac said. He put out. "Let me go get that candle." "No need," Isaac said. He put out his torch with a fire-resistant cloth from a pouch on his belt and relit it in the purple flames of the chandelier. He turned around and noticed Lizyra was missing. "Where is Lizyra?" he asked. Everyone looked around while Adele said, "Isn't it obvious? She distracted you with the purple light and bolted upstairs." Emerging at the top of the staircase, Lizyra was disappointed to find a singular room with two locked doors on across from each other on the western and eastern. Emerging at the top of the staircase, Lizyra was disappointed to find a singular room with two locked doors across from each other on the western and eastern walls. The room wasn't as large as the others and only had a few prayer mats on the ground in a circle around a center mat. She found herself fixated by a panel on the wall with a singular button-like plate. No matter how hard she pressed on it, it didn't seem to move or compress. Turning around at the footsteps behind her, she met an angry Isaac who was already scolding her. "What in the hells are you doing? Just wandering off like that?" Isaac said. "I didn't wander, I knew exactly where I was going. I figured that's the last flame we needed, so I just thought I'd take a quick little looks up here before we hit the grand event." Curious, Osiris asked, "Well, anything up here?" "No," Lizyra said disappointedly. "Just this stupid button thing that doesn't work." Osiris walked over and tried to press it but gave up after realizing it wasn't going to move. He said, "Probably opens one of those locked doors." "Locked door," he said, "probably opens one of those locked doors." Instructing everyone to go back downstairs, Isaac said, "After we light the last torch we can come back and see if it did anything." Heading down the stairs and back into the room with the tree statue, everyone gathered around while Isaac lit the last torch. It ignited in a purple blaze and silently continued to burn while nothing else happened. Everyone stood there in silence while Kitsune pulled a pocket watch from underneath her cloak and checked it. While the non-existent crickets chirped and the
check it.
checked it. While the non-existent crickets chirped and the cicadas buzzed in and out, everyone just stood there waiting for something to happen. After a long silence, Osiris said, "As much as we wanted it to do something, this was probably just a fantasy in ours, when in reality this was just some silly game the goblins constructed out of their obsession for shiny things and pretty." Everyone stood there in silence.
I'm a motherfucking... Oh, wait, no, someone else is.
While Keith
We're fucking the snowman up. And that's it. That's it. He's dead. And every so often you fight the big fucking snowman that appears.
soon pulled a pocket watch from underneath her cloak and checked it. While the non-existent crickets chirped and the cicadas buzzed in and out. Kitsune pulled a pocket watch from underneath her cloak and checked it. While the non-existent crickets chirped and the cicadas buzzed in and out, everyone just stood there waiting for something to happen. After a long silence, Osiris said, "As much as we wanted it to do something, this was probably just a fantasy in our heads, when in reality this was just some silly game the goblins constructed out of their obsession for shiny things and pretty colors." Adele said, "That's a lot of work for any goblin, orc, or troll just to randomly go out of their way to create for no reason." With a glimmer of wonder and hope, Lizyra said, "Maybe there's like a magic word or a secret phrase you have to say for something to happen. Like open sesame. Or abracadabra." Adele joined in by saying, "Or alakazam." Coincidentally, in that same moment all the torches in the entire temple went out in the same breath, leaving everything shrouded in darkness besides the various light sources everyone still possessed. In another moment of silence, Adele interrupted it by saying, "Seriously? Alakazam?" And in that instant, every torch around the tree instantly reignited. But instead of their respective colors from before, they were all burning in a wondrous meld of every color. Every burst of flame burned in a new color, forming into the next sporadically across its own flames, never burning for a second in one continuous color. Trying it out for herself, Kitsune shouted, "Alakazam!" Nothing happened. Isaac said, "What are you doing, Kitsune? If that really is the magic word or phrase, you're going to turn it off or something." Kitsune smirked at him and said, "Oh come on, you think goblins came up with a magic word? Next you're going to say something like hocus pocus is the next magical phrase." You're going to say something like hocus pocus is the next magical phrase.
Oh my fucking god, this keyboard.
You're going to say something like hocus pocus is the next magical phrase. And sure enough, a sudden burst erupted from the stone statue as the stone gray color began to melt away. Leaves of bright hues of blues, greens, and lustrous purples began to gently sway in the breeze, while its bark of deep blue and brown cracked and moaned as it sprung back to life. Its roots seemed to swell into the shattered bits of stone floor as a knot in its trunk slowly opened up into darkness, revealing a spiral staircase made of wood and stone wrapped up around its roots, ascending downward. Lizyra watched in amazement, then said, "Kitsune was right. It was alive after all." Everyone stood there in amazement while Isaac asked, "Well, shall we?"
Alright, I'm done for right now. That took a lot of them. I gotta piss. Stopping and starting every 4 seconds. Just to correct the misspelling was not what I intended for this stream to be, but that's what it became. And now I have to take a piss, a shit, and fucking possibly eat something, so thank you, and goodbye, and love you, and I want you. And I want you to have a good day.